We're going live.
All right. We are live on Armageddon News. Today we're going to be talking about Dawah, which is roughly the Muslim equivalent of evangelism, attempting to spread the Islamic religion by talking to people and so forth. My name is Thaddeus, and I am joined by Lloyd. We've been on this channel a couple times, but just to remind you who we are, Lloyd, why don't you remind us of yourself first? Tell us what you've been up to recently.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lloyd. I lived 11 years in the Middle East. I had an opportunity to travel across the entire Middle East. I've seen the entire Gulf countries. And in the time there, I was really interested in what was creating the culture, in many ways, the dysfunctional culture that I was witnessing in my travels, my work, and especially the conflicts that I was covering. And it was a matter of intense curiosity to me eventually, and my relationships with people there, I learned a great deal, and I eventually started to study Islam, learning about scriptures, and obviously from people like David Wood and others, and also I did some counter-terror study at university, and this combined with a trip to Lebanon, or several trips to Lebanon, really woke me up to the risk of what happens when a country becomes Islamized, the kind of violence that eventually breaks out, and also the political influence and the academic influence of Muslims who are prohibiting the study of Islam, prohibiting the study of Islamic terror. And because we were free to discuss Christian terrorism, Hindu terrorism, and the moment it got to Islam, the faculty was cowed into submission, basically. And we were not allowed to discuss ISIS, who were heavy in the news at the time. And so that became a massive issue. I was banned from the course for posting various documents captured by coalition forces from ISIS, which showed that the dhimmi status was entirely in alignment with Sunni Islam and the Sharia. On that point, I've also learned that Muslims you can argue, they can make the Quran get up and dance and speak and say anything they wanted to say. That said, the Sharia, however, is definitive. It is clear. It's unambiguous. So all of these words, what these words mean, what these concepts are, that there's no doubt in the Sharia. I started to study the Sharia extensively. I now use it almost exclusively because it is the final interpretation of the Quran, of the Sunnah, and of course also the Sirah of Muhammad, where you start to learn that Muhammad is, for all intents and purposes, he is Jesus within Islam. And yeah, these are the sources that I work with now, and it is kryptonite for Islamic apologists. They are terrified of using the Sharia because it shows that they're either deeply mistaken or that they are lying.
Excellent. Lloyd forgot to mention that he has a channel discussing these issues. See the description box for that. My name's Thaddeus, and my channel is Reasoned Answers. I've been a Christian apologist on an informal basis, mostly just talking to friends and occasionally people I meet for about 20 years. About 2 years ago, I became interested in Islam, was introduced to the more intensive study of Islam, having known just some basics before through David Wood, and I feel like the Lord has been calling me to make this my main calling, to talk about Islam, showing the depravity of the religion and helping Muslims to come out of the religion. Not here because I hate Muslims or anything remotely like that. If I hated Muslims, I would just allow them to continue in their false faith and go to hell. Instead, I'm here trying to teach them about what the religion really teaches so they can make an informed basis and end up rejecting it, because the truth is appealing. Islam has to lie to stay alive. So Lloyd is going to open us with what we call an Islamic fun fact, just a little tidbit, and then we'll dive into the presentation for today, which will be on Dawah, as I said, the Muslim equivalent to evangelism. Specifically, we are going to be going through a work by Bilal Phillips, a prominent Muslim apologist, called Dawah Training. We looked at a number of manuals. They all are more or less the same, so we just picked one to run through.
Yeah, coincidentally, David Wood just featured, as you did a while back, Bilal Phillips saying there's an avalanche, a tsunami of Muslims leaving the faith. So good timing. Yeah. Right, I'm gonna just bring up my screen share. All right, the screen share should be up. Right, David Wood very humorously always speaks about the miracle of reinterpretation. So let's see how this is going to be reinterpreted by our friends out there. So this is from Bukhari and Sunan an-Nasai. Aisha said, Al-Harith bin Hisham asked the Messenger of Allah, how does revelation come to you? And Muhammad said, like the ringing of a bell. And when it departs, I remember what he, the angel, said, and this is the hardest on me. So Muhammad would receive revelation, as we know, while wearing Aisha's clothes, if you guys are familiar with the hadiths. And he would wear all his wife's clothes, but he would only get revelation while wearing Aisha's clothing, cross-dresser that he was. But he said that the ringing of the bell is when he sometimes gained revelation, and this was the hardest on him. So let's have a look at what else he said in the Jihad, Kitab al-Jihad. This is Sunan Abu Dawud, the chapter regarding bells, right? Abu Huraira reported that Muhammad said, the bell is a musical instrument of Satan. So how do we explain that? And this is Sahih, right? So how do we explain this? Muhammad would hear a bell. This would harden him, but he gained revelation from Satan.
I don't know. Seems to be the case. We presented the same fact on my channel last week, and I got one Muslim comment on it, and he's like, LOL, if you believe bells are from Satan, then why do you ring bells in your church? It's like, no, we don't believe that. That is what your prophet said, however, and so you're required to believe it. He didn't seem to quite understand the connection. He's like, what's the problem here?
Yeah. What's interesting is, tell me something. How do the Jews revere, say, Moses, for argument's sake? Do they treat Moses as an infallible word of God, like the example of God on earth, that they need to follow him in the way that he walked into the bathroom, walked out of the bathroom, the way he urinated? Do they believe that, all these crazy things? Because Muhammad, they might call him a prophet. They don't treat him. They treat him like a messiah.
Yes, exactly. It's ironic that every Muslim will say we worship one God only, but then when you look in practice, Muhammad is treated like a god, and the Kaaba, the black stone, is treated like a god. It can forgive your sins, and you got all these elements in Islam that aren't consistent with the idea that you worship one God only, the most prominent being the virtual worship of Muhammad.
On that point, you mentioned a very interesting point, the conversation I had. They claim that Allah forgives your sins, right? However, when you die, you are tormented in the grave. They speak of people being crushed. They speak of people being hit with hammers, of people suffering horrendous torments in the grave while they're dead. And then when they are taken to paradise, they have to cross the chasm of fire across hell. They've got to travel on their hands and knees across a razor-thin, razor-sharp bridge, which will cut them, and they may be burned to a crisp. They will be tortured by the fires of hell, burning them, burning out their eyes, burning their skin, crisping their hands as they get across. And then when they get to the other side, they have to retaliate with violence against other Muslims. They've got to beat them, bite them, kick them, break their bones, rip out their eyes in retaliation for the evil that was done, and suffer this horrendous punishment. And then they get to go to paradise. What if their sins are forgiven? Why are they going through these 3 levels of torment?
Good question. Very good question.
I find this, I mean, and also the violent imagery within their concept of going to paradise. It's insane.
Yeah, the Quran actually says that all Muslims will go to hell and then some will be rescued out of it later on. So it seems everyone is subjected to hellfire, and Allah is so generous that he rescues a few out of it.
Yeah, of course. And then Bilal Phillips says that 72 out of every 3 Muslims effectively will go to hell, which is insane. And of course, as we read in the jihad, the group that feels itself closest to the scripture must kill those groups that are not, because those groups are hypocrites. So violence piled on top of violence, which is insanity. Yeah.
So we have a couple questions for you. The first one asked if you were familiar with the channel Takia Watch.
Yes, I am.
And then the second question was, can you put the hadith in the live chat so they can save it?
Okay, yeah, cool. So that is, let me just go back to that. Let me type this out.
Yep. While you're working on that, I'll go ahead and introduce our subject for today. So we're going to be looking at the training manual by Bilal Phillips, as I said. Our purpose isn't so much to say, oh, this is the most horrible thing in the world. When we do that when we look at the Sharia. Our purpose today is a bit different. We're looking to inform Christians about how Muslims do dawah, do evangelism, so that they can better counter it. We will periodically point out some interesting leaps of logic, some pretty hilarious errors in thinking, but our primary purpose today is not to criticize, but to inform about the techniques that are used to do dawah. And as we do this, you'll start to see that there's a lot of propaganda involved. That on the one hand, Bilal is misleading his audience so that they will do what he wants them to do. And on the other hand, he's teaching them to, in turn, mislead the people they are talking to. So that is a basic introduction to what we're going to be talking about. We'll bring up the manual on screen here momentarily.
Okay, here it is. Yeah, I've posted the links to the 2 hadiths. So this is the book by Dawah Phillips.
All right, so he starts opening the book after his fancy little cover with talking about what is dawah. And the first thing he does is he says that, it's derived from this Arabic word, which means to call. It's just calling people to Islam. That's all dawah is. And to justify it, he cites this Quran verse, say, this is my way, and I invite you to Allah with certain knowledge. Now, my question is, what certain knowledge do Muslims have? I've been asking every Muslim who comes and comments on my channel, and Muslims I talk to on other YouTube channels and on Facebook and whatnot, the same exact question for many months. I've probably asked 200-300 Muslims this question. What is your best evidence for the truth of Islam? About 90% simply ignore my question. A majority of the remainder say something like, the Trinity makes no sense, except they say it in a more rude manner, which of course is not evidence that Islam is true at all. Even if they were to establish that Christianity was false, which they can't because they have no understanding of what Christianity actually teaches. But even if they were to establish that, it would in no way make Islam true. So it seems that they have very little, quote unquote, certain knowledge. What about you, Lloyd? Have you heard any good arguments for the truth of Islam?
No, I've just seen them avoid it. I've seen them just literally avoid it. On another point, though, if slight tangent, but this is my way, and I invite you to allow with certain knowledge. You know that I've been doing a lot of research on Gnosticism and its relationship to Islam. And when they speak of certain knowledge within the Quran, in multiple cases, one can say that seems to imply sacred knowledge, which is the gnosis. Now, when you read through the Sharia, it discusses gnosis, Gnosticism, Gnostic states copiously, right? And so when they speak of certain knowledge, now don't forget, with the Gnostics, they believe that sacred knowledge would give you salvation, would send you to these states of bliss in connection with the divine, not grace of God, but knowledge. So I think there may be a possibility that this is a reference to that.
Could be. So then he goes on here and he talks about the so-called virtues of doing Dawah. And, he says Dawah is the basic mission of the prophets, which, even if that was correct, would it mean it was the mission for the people? But, they're called to tell people to worship Allah alone. And then he cites this verse, I have sent every nation a messenger proclaiming worship Allah and avoid worship of false gods. How many nations do you think have existed in the history of the world? Well,
yeah, we've discussed that, and we haven't done a scientific survey, but if we pick 1,000, 2,000, how many back through history, back through thousands of years, 10,000, I don't know. But as we discussed, if there were 1,000 nations, why did only one accept this message? Because then Allah has a massive failure rate.
Indeed, and it actually gets worse, right? Because in the Hadith, we learned that there was 140,000 prophets. And apparently 399,999 of those failed to teach Islam, because the only evidence we have of Islam supposedly comes from Muhammad.
True. So yeah, if 139,999 prophets that supposedly taught Islam are unknown, have no names, have no reference in any documentation, who were they referring to? I'd love to see the names, the documents. And then they also state, obviously, that Moses, Abraham, Noah, Jesus, all of them were Muslim prophets, even Adam. So where was the Quran then? Where's the proof of this? Would love to see it. Where's the book? Where is anything? And there is no proof. So they claim there's 140,000 prophets, and yet somehow the only prophets they know are the ones in the Torah.
Yeah, I mean, that's very interesting, because the Quran makes this claim that they would send a messenger to every nation, and the Hadith makes it even broader, saying there's 140,000. Yet the Quran knows of some prophets. It knows of Moses, it knows of Abraham, and knows of David, knows of Solomon, knows of Jesus. These are all Jewish prophets. Why did Allah send, maybe 24 or so prophets that the Quran can identify to the tiny nation of Israel, and the Quran doesn't know about any prophet he sent to any other nation? Sure seems like the Quran might be just trying to copy the Bible and pretend that it's a message to all people. What do you think?
I would think so. It does seem to plagiarize the Bible extensively, as we've covered in other shows. And in fact, if you read through the Sirah, it seems to be a direct plagiarism of the Gospels. They try to turn Muhammad, my apologies, into a fake Jesus. So yeah, I think it's plagiarism. And also they've plagiarized numerous scriptures that existed, non-Christian scriptures that existed prior to the Quran. For instance, the story of Jesus apparently taking clay and making these birds come alive, that is taken straight out of the infancy Gospel of Thomas, and numerous other stories of that type. So yeah.
And it somehow finds its way into the Quran, which claims that it is only confirming the Jewish and Christian scriptures, specifically the Torah and the Gospel that came before it. But it's borrowing all these stories that are not found in either of those, but are known to have existed in heretical sources. Very odd.
What's interesting, when you read the Sirah as well, for instance, they speak of him visiting with these camels selling his goods in, for instance, Busra in Syria. And there he meets a Christian monk, and they always refer to Christian monk, a Christian, without defining it more deeply than that. But for instance, a monk called Nestor might just be a Nestorian, which would be a Gnostic heretic. There's the monk Waraka bin Naufal, who was probably either an Arian or Ebionite priest, right? Again, another Gnostic Christian sect, quote unquote. So yeah, he was learning all of these heretical Christian teachings or which were actually, the Gnostics were a reaction to Christianity, pushing back against it. So yeah, and he thought this was Christianity. So yeah, I think he was very much astray.
Yeah, definitely. So as we go on here, Bilal continues to try to justify doing Dawah, and he has to really stretch the meaning of some of these Quran verses. I just want to point out one example here, verse 41:33. Who is better in speech than the one who calls to Allah, does righteous deeds, and says, indeed, I am among the Muslims. You might think that the straightforward meaning of that verse is that one who in their personal life calls upon God and does righteous deeds and so forth. And you would probably be correct. But according to Bilal, what this verse actually means is, who is better in speech than the one who calls other people to come to Allah? And he just adds some extra words in there to try to justify his interpretation. And then he says, the best words any human being can speak are words of guidance, inviting people to Islam. The reward for giving dawah must be tremendous. So notice how it's all about getting rewards. I spend a lot of time doing evangelism. I don't expect any special reward from God, nor do I want any special reward. I'm doing evangelism. I'm teaching people about Christianity because I have found that, God is really amazing, and I want other people to experience the same awesomeness that I have. And, when I die, I'll get the same reward any Christian does, which is the being in the eternal presence of God. And what more could I possibly want other than that? I don't have any desire for virgins in heaven. That seems like a pretty lame reward, if you ask me, in comparison to actually getting to be with God.
Yeah, it's interesting that line in 41:33, who is better in speech than one who calls to Allah? Are they saying one who calls others to Allah, or one who himself addresses Allah in prayer? Because that's very, very vague, and he stretches it to say, I don't know that this has a connotation or an implication of actual evangelism. So yeah, that's a really interesting way that he's using this, and implying that, as I said, they make the Quran dance and sing whatever they want it to.
Yeah, I think it's a good example how the actual words of the Quran don't matter. You can just pretend they mean whatever you want them to mean. And the real authority is whatever the scholars decide the Quran means, not what the Quran itself says.
Yeah.
So continuing on to the next page, he starts citing some hadith in his attempts to justify doing dawah, which all seem to be about doing good deeds. They don't seem to be about believing in God at all, which just kind of shows that Islam is a works-based religion. It's not about, it's not about what we would consider morality. It's about your outward appearances.
Yeah, but also, if you do this, you'll get that. Every good deed would be rewarded tenfold. If you do this, you'll do that. But if you go on jihad, you'll get 100 times more. And if you go on jihad and your horse is killed and you were killed, you'll get double that 100 times. And it's insane, this accounting, these scales. And yet you still don't know if you're going to achieve paradise. You have no idea. You're in doubt constantly, which is why you're always working to try to earn this salvation. And the only guarantee is to go in jihad and either kill or be killed, which I just find this, how does this work? This is all about, you're still always constantly in doubt. There's no concept of grace. Allah will only love you if you love him first. God loves us whether we love him or not.
Well, not
so
according
this
to
is a
Islam.
really very different idea. Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say, not according to Islam. The Quran says that Allah only loves those who first love him. That's not love. That is a master-slave relationship. You do nice things for Allah, then he'll like you. But if you don't, too bad, he doesn't love you. We do have some comments from the chat here.
Yeah.
Constance says Muslims collect brownie points for salvation, hoped for but not guaranteed. Absolutely correct. There's one possible exception, and that would be dying a martyr's death while doing jihad,
Yeah.
which is why jihad has so much appeal, no doubt. Rory said that he had a religious education teacher that said Muhammad plagiarized from the Bible, and that religious education teacher would be quite accurate, at least in the modern sense of plagiarize. There might not have been so many ethical implications of copying, but when you say that, I got this material from God himself, he gave it to me, it's his speech, and you actually just copied it from someone else, that's a bigger issue than plagiarism even, I would say.
Yeah.
Red Pill said there are no contradictions in the Quran, ... It's all the teachings. All of its teachings are in full compliance with Satan.
Yeah.
Very good. I like that. Samantha said there's absolutely nothing a Muslim can say to me to become one of them, nothing. And that's because you already have truth. Why would you trade truth for a lie? She also added, nothing they say makes any sense, very contradicting. And I agree completely. You talk to a Muslim long enough and they'll give two different contradictory ideas. And then when you point that out, they will refuse to see the problem and be like, I don't see how that's a contradiction. I only said A is B and A is not B at the same time, but there's no contradiction there.
Well, they're required, as we've covered before on the show, they're required to love Muhammad more than anything in their life, which is plagiarized straight out of where Jesus says, that to love him, to love God, right? And so you have to love Muhammad more than your life, more than your wealth, more than your family, and so on. So they do place him above all other people. They do place him in the same category as Jesus. And lost my thread. Lost my thread there for some reason. What was the last thing that you mentioned, Thaddeus? Pardon me.
It's a good question. Oh yeah, about Muslims contradicting themselves about how
So they're not allowed. Remember, it's illegal for them to criticize Muhammad. It is forbidden. It is a sin that will go to hell, and they can also be charged with a crime in Islam, which means they can be punished. They could even be killed for blasphemy. So how can they acknowledge the evil, immoral things Muhammad did when they have to acknowledge that he is perfect? How can they condemn his rape of a 9-year-old girl? His torture of someone for money, burning a fire on his chest, his mass murder of men and boys, his allowing men to rape women. How do you criticize those? You cannot. They cannot condemn those ever. I've asked them. I've put them in those positions when they know it's a sin to do so, so they can read them, but they have to deny them. This makes them not just hypocrites, but there's a deliberate cognitive dissonance there. There's a deliberate schizophrenia.
Yeah, just as a good example, yesterday or perhaps the day before, a Muslim put on one of my videos, why are you talking about Aisha, Muhammad's wife, so-called wife, being only 9 years old when he had sex with her? That was normal back then. And then he gave all these examples, most of which were outright lies, supposedly showing it was normal. And I responded, if Muhammad's the perfect example for all of humanity, it doesn't matter what was normal then. It must be true today. And he said, yeah, you're right. So then I said, so why are you following a prophet who encourages you to rape 9-year-old girls? And then he just copied and pasted his original post again. And then I asked him again, what difference does it make what was normal? His example for all of you, man, you're going to follow his example? And of course, that was the end of the conversation. So on the one hand, he wants to say, yes, I agree, he's the best example. On the other hand, he knows he's not and is trying to resolve his own cognitive dissonance.
If we put Jesus side by side with Muhammad, right? How many people did Jesus murder versus how many people did Muhammad murder? How many caravans did Jesus rob? How many people in the caravans did he kill for their money? How many people did he allow his people to rape? You're going to find 0 on the side of Jesus and like hundreds, thousands on the side of Muhammad. how does that work out to be a moral man? Because that means that theft is legal in Islam. Rape is legal in Islam. Lying is legal in Islam. Torture, assassination, all legal in Islam because Muhammad did them.
Absolutely. And we'll see some of that as we go through this Dawah manual about
Let's
how
continue. Yeah.
stuff. We scroll down a little bit. Bilal makes this, or actually he quotes the Quran, which makes this claim that you are the best nation raised up for mankind, enjoy righteousness, forbid corruption, and believe in Allah. So first of all, there's this claim that you're the best nation. And then there's the second half of this. What are you supposed to do in response? Are you supposed to tell everyone about how amazing Allah is and ask them to come to Islam so that they can enjoy the same benefits? No, you're supposed to forbid corruption. Of course, Islam defines corruption rather bizarrely by our standards, but even ignoring that, it's all about works again. There's nothing about what you believe, it's only about what you do.
Yeah. Yeah. Corruption is really just misleading people away from Islam and towards other religions. Right? That is corruption. And of course, corruption is worse than killing, as we know in Quran 532, 533. So they can kill you for leading people away from Islam. So that's corruption. In fact, I have some notes on that, right? As I discussed when we did the show last week on Thaddeus' channel, let's have a look. They just said that the Muslims are the best of people, the best nation. Now, you can become a Muslim merely by saying the Shahada, right? So you're not necessarily part of this nation, but just by accepting that, suddenly you become one of the best. Let's have a look. In Deuteronomy 14:2, just one example. You are a people holy to the Lord your God. Out of all the peoples on the face of the earth, the Lord has chosen you to be his treasured possession, right? So that is Deuteronomy 14:8. But let's have a look at what the Quran says. In Al-Bayyinah, the clear evidence, right? Let's look at different translations. It says that among the people, now here, God refers to, in the Bible, to the Jews and says, you are my treasured possession, right? You're my witnesses. However, the Quran takes its time, and Allah takes his time to insult non-Muslims, especially Christians and Jews, the people of the scripture. They will abide in the fire of hell. They are the worst of created beings. We are the worst of created beings. Yusuf Ali, they are the worst of creatures. Muhammad Shakir, translation, they are the worst of men. In the corpus, they're the worst of the creatures. And in Google Translate, if you take the original Arabic, it says that Christians and Jews are the evil of the wilderness, right? And if we go to a word-for-word meaning of the Quran, volume 3, page 2008, such ones are the worst of creatures, all right? So that's the verse, and let's go see what they tell us in the translation. Shar, plural ashra, bad, worse, worst, evil, wicked, right? Let's continue. So the clear evidence, Surah 98, Al-Bayyinah. This is Quran, word by word, Surah 98. And it says that we are the worst of the creatures. So we have abandoned religion. Christianity and Judaism are no longer valid. They are abandonment of religion. They are null and void religions, worthless religions. They say Deen al-Batil. So we're the worst of creatures, the lowest of creation. Again, the worst of creatures. Those who believe and do good works, a religion of works, are the best of created beings. They are the best of men. In Google Translate, they are the best of the righteous. Now notice, their reward is with their Lord, the gardens of Eden under which rivers flow, wherein they dwell forever, right? So yeah, so that's what you get for this. But let's have a final look in Bukhari, volume 6, book 60, hadith 80. Narrated Abu Huraira, you, true Muslims, are the best of peoples ever raised up for mankind. This means the best of peoples for the people as you bring them with chains on their necks until they embrace Islam. You must bring people with chains on their necks until they embrace Islam. I'll pause there.
Yeah, and the reason we're spending so much time on this is because it's actually really important. It may seem like just a silly aside, but I found that for many, perhaps even the large majority of Muslims, their confidence in Islam is based primarily on thinking themselves better than Christians. And they are taught this material using a bunch of lies about Christians, basically from the time of birth. As we go through the Dawah manual, we'll see how the law uses the same idea in very subtle ways.
Yeah, he does.
So let's see, we're talking about the best of nation, and then if you scroll back up a second to the best of nation material, best of all peoples. This sentence here in red, if they fail to believe in Allah by applying the Sharia in their governments and so forth. So he's pointing out here in a subtle way that only the Muslim is likely to grasp, that if you aren't following Sharia law, then you aren't a real Muslim. And we're often told online that the Sharia law is meaningless, has nothing to do with Islam. But right here, Bilal says that if you don't apply the Sharia law in your government, you're not a believing Muslim.
Yeah, which tells us why they are so ready to deny the Sharia.
Well, because it's embarrassing, and they know they have to believe it, but they don't want to talk about it because it's embarrassing.
Yeah, I should note that I should tell these people that every time I talk about Sharia, I get the very same. These guys are reading off a script. They always tell me, "What do you think the Sharia is?" Literally word for word. I've seen it like a million times. Like guys, how about you just answer the question?
Absolutely. So then he starts going into the so-called obligation of doing Dawah. But he kind of contradicts himself. First, he says that Dawah is an obligation for everyone. But then, he's like, well, maybe not. Maybe the people who are less gifted at it don't have to do it. And that's on the next page. Kind of follows the same pattern as doing jihad, that it's obligatory for you if you're the only Muslim in an area. It's obligatory for you if you are ready and able. But if you're not, if you don't want to or otherwise, you can instead just financially support the activity as long as there are other Muslims willing to do it.
Yeah, so they speak of the individual obligatory duty, or fard ain, and which is this here, and they speak of fard kifaya, a collective obligatory duty. So someone within the group must do it, or the crime and sin of non-performance and non-conformance will fall upon the ummah. And he stresses here the responsibility of enjoining the good and forbidding the evil. We did a show on jihad, if you check Thaddeus' channel. We may have done it here as well, where enjoining the good and forbidding the evil actually is applying violence and force, starting with threats and then ultimately hitting people, then escalating according to the rules of the Sharia, then bringing friends, breaking things, smashing things, and if that doesn't work, then bringing weapons with your friends and then attacking. So they have wonderful euphemisms here, enjoining the good and forbidding evil, when they mean breaking things, smashing things, and potentially killing people with weapons.
And lest there be any doubt, the final sentence here, he says that it's not that it would be obligatory if you have good knowledge of the Sharia, but not so much if you don't have good knowledge of the Sharia. Again, emphasizing that what the Sharia teaches is what's actually the most important thing in Islam, and that law is exactly where we get these ideas that good and evil and whatnot have these non-standard definitions. So the Muslim can say, I believe in doing good, and they mean one thing, but they know you think another, and they won't tell you that they don't mean the same thing, because they know that that the impression you get is what's most important, not that you actually understand what's being talked about.
Yeah. Should I show that from the Sharia to show how they utilize euphemisms here, which are designed to mislead?
Sure, go ahead and pull that up.
So please, in the description box, you will find links to all of the Sharia manuals that we use. This is the world's most famous and common Sharia manual. Also, the link to this Dawah manual is in the description box. So this is commanding the right and forbidding the wrong. And for instance, part of that is looking, so when you go into the chapter on commanding the right and forbidding the wrong, you find this, looking into another's house without permission. The prophet said, if a man looks at you without permission and you throw a rock at him and knock out his eye, you would not have committed any offense. This is law. The word of Muhammad is law. This is now the Sharia. This is in the most famous Sharia manual, or the schools of Islamic jurisprudence. Whoever peeps into a house without people's permission, they may put out his eye. And this is not a crime under the Sharia. Now, whoever of you sees something wrong, let him change it with his hand. Notice it doesn't say talk to people. It says if you see something wrong, change it with your hand. Now, if we read through this in depth, we will discover that changing it with your hand means smashing it, breaking it, if need be, hitting the other person to do so, right? If you're unable to change it with your hand, then change it with your tongue. In other words, if you can't kill that man or woman, then speak to them. And if unable, then do so with your heart. And that is the weakest degree of faith. So let's discuss the obligation to command the right. What do they mean by commanding the right? Do you want to say anything, Thaddeus?
Yeah, before you go on, you know, this is kind of the exact opposite of what we think it should be, that your first choice should be to influence someone with your actions, with your beliefs, then with your words, and then only as a last resort by force in self-defense or whatnot. Seems that Islam is exactly upside down.
Yeah, it's backwards. It's completely backwards. Right, so let's have a look. Commanding the right and forbidding the wrong. Let there be a group of you who call to good, commanding the right and forbidding the wrong. Right, that's Quran 3:104. This verse explains that commanding the right and forbidding the wrong are communal rather than personal obligations, right? If enough people do it, meaning that whenever a wrong is seen, one of those who see it corrects it, and the responsibility is lifted from the rest, and those who perform it being expressly mentioned as successful. So let's have a look in terms of the obligatory character of jihad, which is commanding the right. Jihad is commanding the right. Jihad is a communal obligation. When enough people perform it to successfully accomplish it, it is no longer obligatory upon others. He who provides the equipment for a soldier in jihad has himself performed jihad. If none of those concerned perform jihad and it does not happen at all, then everyone who is aware that it is obligatory is guilty of sin. Right? Jihad is a communal obligation, and there are two possible states in respect to non-Muslims. So this is commanding the right and forbidding the wrong in terms of their dealings with non-Muslims. The first is when the non-Muslims are in their own countries, in which case jihad is a communal obligation, and this is what the author is speaking of when he says it is a communal obligation upon Muslims each year, right? So they have to attack non-Muslim countries at least once a year to command the right and forbid the wrong, because we are wrong. We are doing the wrong. So remember, it says here, reviling him in harshness, right? To use that, forcibly stopping the act, such as by breaking musical instruments or pouring out wine. You'll notice, you'll find lots of these immigrants to Europe have gone and smashed wine bottles during Ramadan in stores, because the literal example is mentioned in the Sharia. And finally, intimidation and threatening to strike the person or actually hitting him to stop what he is doing. So at a normal social level, at the normal level of social and personal discourse, this is what you have to do within your family. We've covered this at length in a different episode. We've discussed this, we went through this chapter. So this is what you do at home. This is what you do with your neighbors, your family, and ultimately what you do with the rest of the world. You break things. I'll pause there and we go back to the, any comments, Thaddeus?
Yep, we got a couple comments from the chat here. Samantha said, they are a forced religion. God does not force himself on anyone. You have a choice to serve my God. Allah is false and crude, no matter how much they call him holy. Amen to that. JC said the Sharia is shaped by schools of thoughts. Scholars, doctors of Quran make laws, shape its constitution, but different flavors of implementation. And they said the real Sharia are in the Quran and Hadith. So
Can I comment on that?
the
Yeah, go
problem
ahead.
with that, yeah, the problem with that is the Quran and Hadith can be made to say whatever you want to. So you're right. Different Muslims have different opinions about which Sharia law is most correct. Although on the majority of things, there's no disagreement between the different schools. But just try this the next time you're talking to a Muslim. Ask them which Sharia law they believe in. I'm guessing you won't get an answer. And the reason is, as long as they're talking about the Quran, they can pretend it says whatever they want it to say. When they have to go to a Sharia manual, because it's much more explicit, then they can no longer pretend. They can no longer practice this half-truth of saying words which they believe, but they're defining the words in a non-standard way.
Yeah. Yeah. Also, the Quran is abrogated. Even the Hadith are abrogated. The Hadith abrogate the Quran, and this is not something that people know on a casual basis. You have to be a scholar to actually study these things. I'm sure you can look it up. So many of these verses they'll quote are non-binding. Many of these fatwa they quote are non-binding. The binding ones are in the Sharia manuals, the fiqh manuals of the four schools. Those have names. You can read them. They read them. So why don't we all just crack open a Sharia manual and read it? Because that is the final interpretation by the scholars. There's no ambiguity there. There's no discussion. This is what it says.
Absolutely. So continuing on with Bilal's work here, he goes on to start to define what Dawah really means. He says, all it states that a group of the believers should shoulder the responsibility for promoting virtue and prohibiting vice in society. Religion is not merely a personal affair as perceived in the West. Policing the society should not be left to the government alone, but should be shared by members of the community. So, just three different senses to kind of say the same thing that we've been saying, that it's primarily about actions. Muslims are empowered to take the law into their own hands. Did you have any thoughts you wanted to add there?
No, you're right. And we've just seen that commanding the right and forbidding the wrong means violence. That's how it's defined in the Sharia. It means violence, taking violent action, threatening, breaking, and attacking.
Yeah, so you can kind of subtly see how Bilal is supporting the Sharia. He knows it. He knows what it says, but at the same time not being explicit about it.
And don't forget, the highest form of action is to use your hands, whereas the lowest form is to speak out, or the lower form is to speak out. So a Muslim who's willing to do violence, take action, that takes precedence. And it doesn't say take peaceful action. It says break things, smash things, kill people. As I said, it escalates, it goes on. It says use violence, bring weapons, if need be, bring friends with weapons.
So then he continues on the next page, talking about how so he has just established the so-called community obligation, then he tries to make it individual, and he gives this really interesting example. So he quotes this Quran verse that says, say he is Allah and unique, Allah is self-sufficient, he did not give birth, nor is he born, and nothing is similar to him. Now this is one of the very first verses that every Muslim learns as they are learning to memorize the Quran. And there's a very good reason for that, because it's a direct attack specifically on Christianity. I don't know about a lot of religions that teach that that God gave birth to himself, as the Muslims want to distort the Christian belief to be. But here's an explicit condemnation of that. And then he makes this ridiculous statement that every verse contains a crucial message about Allah, which most religions are ignorant of. Now, I don't know which religion is supposedly ignorant of this. Christians don't believe that God was born in the normal sense of the term. They believe that he became man, took on human flesh, and was born in the biological sense, but not in the sense that he was a created being, which is, of course, what the Quran is attempting to attack here. And I certainly don't know any other religions that teach this. So he's just trying to pretend that all religions are ignorant of this, when it's really just a distorted attack on Christianity.
But again, it's an assertion. They hence Muslims make these assertions, and what they don't convey to us is that he is drawing upon a religious tradition going back about 800 years, from specifically three major scholars in Islam, and their anti-Christian polemics are based essentially on just these three scholars. That would be Ibn Hazm, who's been partially translated, but who has been further, his works have been further developed and his arguments further clarified, shall we say, by two additional scholars, Ibn Qayyim and Ibn Taymiyyah. Ibn Taymiyyah is also the foremost jihad scholar in Islam. So, yeah, so they don't talk about that. Shall I bring up what they actually say, where he's basing this upon it, and where this argument logically leads, and what they formally teach in their polemics, in their tafsir, their
Sure.
exegesis?
If you'd like, let's address a couple of comments from the
Sure,
chat
yeah.
real quick here. First of all, hello to Sonia. Sonia Azam7 is in the chat, a good friend of ours. We've done some shows with her, so welcome. So Jay, stay, getting it in, made a comment about how the Muslims are controlled in a system of darkness and we can't see it, that the system is oppressing us in a sense too, keeping us from doing anything about it. Specifically says, rather than praying and fasting about this, hoping the system will save them from the system is absolute apostate state. So I think the point here is that we need to actually, do something about this. Just sitting here learning knowledge isn't going to help anyone. If some Muslims happen to watch it, great, they might learn something, but really this is a message for the Christians. We want you to use this material and by understanding how Muslims do dawah, hopefully you can better counter. By understanding the way they think, you can hopefully come up with better ways to talk to them.
Yeah, this is the foundation level. As we get deeper into the book, in a different episode, you're going to start seeing their specific arguments. They have scripts, and we will be going through those scripts. We're trying to set the foundation and trying to show you where they're coming from in terms of the very vague generalities here. But this manual does become specific, and it's going to be valuable for you to understand how they argue online, how they're trained and indoctrinated and lied to.
Joachim asked or said, I can't see what channel this is. Who is this? The channel you're on is called Armageddon News. Myself and Lloyd are guests on this channel. We were invited to contribute some material to the channel, and we're very thankful for that. We both have our own channels as well, which are found in the description box. Later, go back and watch the introduction to this. We told who we were and why you should trust us.
Yeah. Yeah, I can switch over to some of these to clarify some of what they teach.
Go ahead.
So in Islam, they try hard not to show us what their sources are. The less we know, the more they can bamboozle us. But also the scholars are lying to their Muslims, and they don't want their own people to understand the details, right? So one of the primary books, and this one that I'm reading from here is called Guidance to the Uncertain. It goes under a few names, but Guidance to the Uncertain in Reply to the Jews and the Christians by Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah, right? This is a link to the book. I will paste this in the comments here so you can download. There should be a link to this in the description box below, but there's a link now. Okay, so in the terms of did not give birth, nor was he born, let's have a look and read what Ibn Qayyim has said. The fundamentals of the Christian religion are built on the vilification of God and joining partners to him, and the fable of redemption. So Christianity is designed to insult and humiliate God. Before the strayed people, that's Christians, the worshippers of the cross, so we worship the cross, not Jesus, not God, and the images painted on the walls and the ceilings. So before we concocted something to defame the Muslims with, should not they first feel ashamed? So before we reply to them, shouldn't we feel shame? These are the roots of those whose religion is entrenched in the belief that the Lord of the heavens and the earth descended from the authority of his greatness and throne and entered the vagina of a woman who eats, drinks, urinates, evacuates her bowels, and menstruates. Then he got attached to the inside of her abdomen, her uterus, and dwelled there for 9 months, wobbling between excrement, urine, and menstrual blood. Then he was born to be swaddled, put in the cradle, and each time he cried, his mother breastfed him. Then he went to school along with other boys. Then he ended up being slapped on the cheek by the Jews in ridiculing him. Your comments, Thaddeus, before I move on?
I think it's kind of humorous that they think that this is supposedly humiliating. Isn't this exactly how every human being is born? Should every human being be humiliated because they were born of a woman? I mean, come on now.
Yeah, they've got a fantasy idea of God, obviously, that's perfect, that never comes to earth, that has no interest in coming to earth. In fact, he's too weak to come to earth. He's unable to do this. Very weak Allah, this Allah character. As Jay Smith says, you need a bigger God. Let's have a look. The Lord's Prayer, the prayer of the Nazarenes ridicules the worshipped deity. They chose a way of prayer during which the most devoted and ascetic amongst them would consider it no great matter if he happens to pass urine dripping on his thighs and legs. Then he would take the direction of the east, make the sign of the cross, and worship the crucified deity, starting his prayer by saying, Our Father in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done. So the Lord's Prayer, according to them, is designed as an insult to God, and we would find it totally normal, not unusual, to urinate while sitting in the pew at church with urine dripping on our thighs and legs while praying in church.
I mean, this is just some of the most vile, ridiculous stuff you can imagine. I mean, who in their right mind would be like, oh, I know how to attack the Christians. I'll say that they go to the bathroom while they're praying. No one will think that that's a lie.
Yeah, sitting in church in their pants.
It's just so ridiculous.
Yeah, and this is just one example I picked. I mean, this is just one example from a 360-page book.
And is it any wonder that every Muslim child grows to think of themselves as vastly superior to the Christians when they're learning material like this as if it was factual, that this is what Christians actually do?
Yeah, they're taught to, I mean, this is teaching them to hate us. You know, this is really teaching them to hate us. So yeah, we can move on. I just wanted to clarify that point. What they really think of it's equally bad. It's worse than that.
Absolutely. So then after he comes up with this highly deceptive example about how everyone needs to have Dawah, then he goes on to say basically that if you don't give Dawah, that is the same thing as lying about Islam. That if you're not, that if you don't give this so-called clear message that you're going to go to hell. And then he gives this example about how some people have refused to give Islam to people of a different race because they think they're evil devils and whatnot. But I have a question. If Muslims are going to be going to hell for concealing what they believe, what does that say about our friends here on YouTube? Because I've talked with probably 1,000 or more Muslims on YouTube, and I would say well over 90% simply hide what they believe. They have no interest in talking about Islam. All they want to do is say how horrible us Christians are. So either Bilal is wrong, or there's a lot of Muslims in the YouTube comment section who are going to go to hell. He also contradicts the Sharia law here. The Sharia law actually teaches the exact opposite. It says that it doesn't say you're forbidden to reveal what Islam teaches. It actually says it doesn't say you're forbidden to conceal what Islam teaches. Sorry, misspoke. It says that you shouldn't tell what Islam teaches unless it's absolutely necessary. Why don't you take us through the passage?
Yeah, so it says in the Reliance of the Traveler, the Umdat al-Salik, which is this book here. This again is the most famous fiqh manual, or sacred law, or Sharia manual. I'm just going to use them interchangeably. Sharia is the law of Allah derived from the Quran and the Sunnah, and the fiqh is the exegesis of that by the scholars. So Islam is a religion designed by a committee, basically, of scholars. Anyway, but they have a chapter called K 1.2e and giving directions to wrongdoers. And in that section, we see here, if a Quran is being purchased for someone, it is obligatory that the person be Muslim. The same is true of books of Hadith and books containing the words and deeds of the early Muslims. Quran, in this context, means any work that contains some of the Quran, even a slight amount. This ruling holds for any religious books, even the Tabakat of Sharani. So now we should note that the Hanafi school permits non-Muslims to buy or be given the Quran and other Islamic books. The other three books of fiqh, the other three schools of fiqh say it is legal within the Sharia to provide information to the enemy because we are the enemy. So they're supposed to lie to us, yet he is saying there that they're supposed to, well, hide Islam from us in any shape, way, or form, and yet he's saying that they should teach it. So there's this conflict, and yeah, I think that's clearly a contradiction and an issue within Islam.
Constance asked, when was that book written? I believe it was referring to the
14th century,
guidance for the
1300s.
confused.
This is a 14th century manual. So the Sharia was developed, I would say, between the late 1000s, let's say the early 1100s, and the late 1300s. Mid 1300s was when the Sharia was finally defined and documented, and it cannot change. The Sharia is eternal. It is the law of Allah, but the fiqh is the law derived from the laws of Allah. For instance, you have the 10 commandments, thou shalt not kill, right? For argument's sake, or thou shalt not murder. So what is murder? Can you define it? Yes, you can probably write a 10-volume series of law books on it, and your governments have. You have, under what circumstances is it legal? When is it not legal? What if this? What if that? What if this? That's the fiqh. So the Sharia is like one sentence that's kind of vague, and it needs to be explained through the fiqh. So now let's go to giving directions to wrongdoers, right? So besides giving us Islamic information from their books, showing the way to policemen is also wrongdoing, okay? When they're going to commit injustice and corruption. In other words, that is why, if you look at what happened in France when that nightclub was attacked and 86 people died, that's why when those terrorists were hiding in Molenbeek, they were not given up by informers within by the Muslim community who knew they were there, because that would be giving directions to wrongdoers, to the policemen, to tell them where these jihadis were, because the jihadis committed no injustice. According to Sharia, they were doing perfectly lawful things, perfectly moral things. And teaching, notice, it says here very explicitly, and this is Islamic kryptonite, it is unlawful, illegal. It breaks the Sharia to teach sacred law to those learning it in bad faith. That's you and me, who do not want the knowledge to apply it in their lives, but for an unworthy purpose. Right now, I am using Sharia for an unworthy purpose. I am not trying to become a Muslim and learning Sharia to become a better Muslim. No. So they must not reveal Sharia to non-Muslims.
Very good. So
this is why they cannot ever, if you ask them, what is your favorite Sharia manual? Where's the law? Show me. They won't. They will never do it. Go and show that.
Well, yeah, just what you just said. Both Lloyd and I have been asking Muslims for the last several months, every time they try to say we're wrong about Islam, say, okay, what Sharia manual should we be reading? Not one has ever given an answer.
Yeah. It terrifies them. It's crazy.
They'll say that whatever we said is wrong when we just quote a Sharia manual. Like, okay, what's your Sharia manual that disagrees? And never an answer.
Yeah.
So as in this next section here, he he quotes a hadith for a really odd purpose. If you want to scroll down a bit. So that was kind of the end of the introduction to what is Dawah. Now he's going to go into the characteristics of the person who is giving Dawah, what characteristics the da'i should have. He quotes this hadith here: Islam began as something strange and it will return as something strange, so give glad tidings to strangers. The odd thing about him quoting this, he could just quote it to ask who the strangers are, but and the meaning of the hadith, according to all scholars, is that Islam began as having only a few followers, and before the end times it will return as to only having a few followers. So it's kind of a really strange hadith to quote. in order to justify doing Dawah. It's like, hey, you should do Dawah, but it actually doesn't matter what you're going to do because the Prophet already told us that no one's going to believe in Islam by the end days.
Yeah, that's really weird. That's really, really weird.
He then goes on, after introducing this for strange purposes, he goes on to talk about, well, what is the correct version of Islam? And he says that it is in accordance with what the earliest generations of Islam taught, which is what the same thing Lloyd and I say every time we do one of these shows. We then quote those people, and then we're told we're wrong because those people didn't understand Islam. Well, if they didn't understand Islam, then I guess no one did, because Muhammad explicitly said that his earliest followers were the best, and then the second generation was the second best, and the third generation was the third best, and anyone after that probably didn't know what they're talking about. That's where's the Muhammad.
Yeah. We did a show in depth discussing just that subject on your channel. And yeah, that's what he says. The earliest of, in fact, I mean, the Sunnah relates not just to Muhammad, but also his companions, who must be followed and obeyed. And what's interesting, it says here, do not be of the pagans, of those who split up their religion and became sects, each rejoicing in what it has. When Muhammad explicitly said there will be 73 Islamic sects and 72 will go to hell.
Yeah, and Bilal himself even goes on to quote that, which is, again, is another really bizarre thing to quote here. The reason that he's doing this, I guess, is that he wants it to make it clear that, you know, what he's teaching is the only correct thing. What any other Muslim says, don't listen to them, because there's a 72 out of 73 chance that they have the wrong kind of Islam. So it just goes back. So he's just like, I think he's just really emphasizing that you have to really be knowledgeable. You have to really know what the earliest Muslims taught. If you don't know that, you're probably teaching the wrong thing and shouldn't be doing Dawah. Yeah. That's the only thing I can get out of why he's going into all this about how most Muslims are wrong.
Yeah, Samantha Smith asked, is it not that Muslims are not allowed to ask questions about what is written in the Quran? We actually covered that last week, that is, where it actually states that Muslims should, in the Sharia, it's stated in, I believe it's section A1.4 of the Reliance, that they should simply accept what they are told without question, and the Imam should only provide them with teaching if this Muslim is completely unable to just accept blindly. Then he has to show him the tafsir, the scholarly exegesis. That would be someone like Ibn Kathir, for instance, or Qurtubi. And only then should they be shown these proofs of the scholars, because if they were to know what was actually said within the Sharia and within the Quran, they would lose faith and leave the religion.
Absolutely. It's very bizarre. You know, you'd think if you had truth on your side, the more knowledge someone had, the more likely they would get the correct picture of Islam. But then the Sharia tells us that it's the exact opposite, that the best Muslim is the one who just blindly accepts everything they're told. And the worst, weakest type of Muslim is the one who asks questions. And only as an absolute last resort should you tell them what the scholarly knowledge says. That should be reserved just for the scholars. If you only learn a little bit of it, you're gonna get it wrong, and then you'll probably leave Islam. And that's not us talking. That's the Sharia manual.
Trying to find that passage. Do you remember where the reference was?
I do not offhand.
Oh, here we go. Here we go. So section A4.2, the basic obligation of Islam is to believe in everything brought by the messenger with absolute conviction, free of any doubt. Okay, whoever does this is not obliged to learn the evidences of the scholastic theologians. So you're not supposed to learn it. You just have to accept. In other words, they don't have to learn any knowledge. They must simply repeat what they are told, which is what they do on the online section, right? So what they say here is what befits the common people, the masses, and the vast majority of those learning or possessing sacred knowledge is to refrain from discussing the subtleties of scholastic theology, lest corruption, difficult to eliminate, find its way into their religious convictions. It is better for them to confine themselves to contentment with the above mentioned absolute certainty. Okay, so, and they put, so mention here, what they forbid is that it is heretical to put rationalistic theories ahead of the Quran and the Sunnah. Rationality must be suppressed.
Exactly. If the Quran seems to contradict reality, there's a problem with your understanding of reality, not the Quran.
Well, problem with reality as a whole, according to them. So hopefully that clarifies what they're required. So how do they have knowledge while having ignorance? So in other words, they're not taught to know, they're taught to repeat. They're literally repeating what they are told. That's not knowledge, that's just indoctrination.
Yeah, crazy stuff there. I actually have a good example of this in practice. A Muslim came to my channel a couple of days ago on my video about the, which is called the undeniable logical contradiction or indisputable logical contradiction in the Quran. And after several attempts to explain to him what it means, he finally seemed to get it. And he says that Allah is not subject to reason. He's not subject to your logic. I said, great, you just admit your God's illogical. Enjoy your illogical God.
Yeah. Well, God is logos. Allah is will. So to deny that Allah can commit evil, that Allah can lie, that Allah can be sinful, is to deny him the power to do anything he wants. This is the thinking within Islam. Whereas God can only tell the truth. God can only be good. This is his nature. Whereas Allah can be evil. Allah can lie. Allah can deceive. Allah can murder. Understand? Because to deny that Allah cannot, to say that Allah cannot do anything is to sin against Allah in Islam. This is the illogical trap, or the logic trap they've made for themselves.
Absolutely. So concluding this section about the knowledge that's required of the caller, the da'i, he says that the one essential trait that you must teach everyone is tawheed. This is the Muslim concept of what the nature of God, but then he waffles on and on. He doesn't really define it. Instead, he just says, you know, you're going to the Jews and Christians, you must invite them to the oneness. You should invite them to is the assertion of the oneness of all. It's even called an assertion. You know, you can't demonstrate, you just got to call them to that assertion. You can't explain what it means because apparently Bilal can't. He doesn't ever explain what it means in his manual here. And then after that, you tell them that you need to do 5 prayers and you need to do other things. So it's all about believing this concept, which no one can seem to define, and then doing a bunch of stuff.
And the 5 prayers are obligatory upon us because Jesus will come back as a Muslim and pray behind Muhammad. Jesus will be subservient to Muhammad and Jesus will enforce Muhammad's Sharia. And that's in the Sharia law.
Yeah, whatever they say, right?
Yeah.
So then he just goes on and on. The next several paragraphs are all about Tawheed. He never actually says anything worth commenting on, though, because he just kind of waffles. He can't really define the term. And then he goes into the personality traits of what the caller should have. First one here is knowledge. That sounds fine and good, except remember that knowledge doesn't really mean what we think of by knowledge. It means doing the right things. And then he makes this comment that if the Muslim missionary is ignorant, his message will appear weak. As you can see, he's not really concerned with giving correct knowledge. He's concerned that you will look weak. You know, if you can say the wrong things with a great deal of confidence, that's fine. Just don't appear weak. Just have enough confidence in yourself and what you're saying that you can just shout it louder than anyone else, and that's what constitutes knowledge. I think you wanted to say something on this subject?
No, really, I think we've covered it already. I mean, the contradiction where they talk about knowledge and then talk about not having knowledge, but it's merely just confidence in the message without actually knowing it, because knowing would lose you faith. It's a mess.
Yeah, that's right. I saw the little note there, but We actually
Oh,
already
my
brought that
bad.
up.
Oh, sorry.
No, no, I'm pretty sure that's what we just already brought up.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, serial lines A4.2. I just
Yeah.
covered that section to A4.2 and unthinking belief.
Yeah,
That's what I just covered.
it
Yeah.
came up a little earlier in response to the chat. So
Yeah,
we
my
had
bad.
that
Yeah.
prepared, but we already covered it. So then the second one is kindness. Again, that sounds all fine and good. However, in my experience, this never ever happens.
Don't forget that kindness is one of the weak forms of imposing the good.
Right. And most Muslims, basically every Muslim online, probably much less percentage in face-to-face conversation, but basically every Muslim online ignores this advice, and they are as mean and nasty as possible, probably because they're taking the Sharia manual's advice that being kind and setting a good example is the weakest form of spreading Islam.
Yeah, but they've been taught to hate us. They've been taught that we will literally urinate on ourselves in church. You know, that we created Jesus as an insult to God because he bled, he was human, and that's somehow bad, whereas their God is perfect and a fantasy who is completely inhuman, has no human characteristics whatsoever.
And then he actually makes a very interesting comment here about Moses talking to Pharaoh, which he quotes this Quran verse, by the mercy of Allah, you dealt with them gently. And then, so speak to him, both of you, mildly, in order that he may reflect or fear God. As this kind of really just shows how being kind has been redefined here. You know, I don't think that there was anything kind about Moses telling Pharaoh that if he didn't release the captive Israelites, his empire would be destroyed and he personally would face grave consequences. So we can see that what Bilal means by kind isn't what we think he means by kind. Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with, you know, Moses correcting Pharaoh's error, but kind isn't the correct word to describe what he did.
Yeah, very real.
So then he got the third characteristic is wisdom. He doesn't really say anything of note about wisdom. He doesn't really seem to be able to define what it means. He just says you should have wisdom, and he doesn't really know or explain what he means by that. The fourth one is patience. Again, this is perfectly fine advice, but it's not put into practice in my experience ever. They may try to be patient the first comment they make. As soon as you point out the logical errors, the anger comes out. And I think this is what happens when you don't have truth on your side. You just get angry when people point out. You can't be patient. It's impossible when you're just spewing lies, and you're caught in your lies. What are you going to do? I mean, how can you be patient? You can't patiently explain what you meant because you were caught in a lie.
Yeah.
And then the fifth characteristic trait is morality, and this is the one that I want to talk the most about. He says, great stress has been placed in Islam on good moral character. And my comment to that is no kidding. That's all any Muslim ever wants to talk about, is how self-righteous and amazing they are, how as evil Christians eat pork, and how our women are not properly clothed, and so on and so forth. It's all about appearances.
But he reveals something very interesting here. He says that Ibn Abbas, who was Muhammad's cousin and one of the most famous writers of exegesis of the Quran, the tafsir, which literally means explanation, says that character, Muhammad, you have a magnificent character. They always say that Muhammad had a great personality and character. But he says that they're not referring to Muhammad's character at all. They mean Islam, they mean the religion. You have a great religion. So Muhammad could have been the most reprehensible, and he was, person to ever live, but he had a great religion to adhere to. So as long as you're a Muslim following Islam, it doesn't matter how you are as a human being. Doesn't matter what your character personally is like, as long as you say you're a Muslim, which this is a very subtle, but it's there. It's a very clear contradiction. I don't think it's ambiguous at all, because character refers to the religion of Islam. They're not referring to Muhammad's behavior or his morality or his thinking or his attitude. It's his manners were according to Allah's instructions in the Quran. His character was that of the Quran because it is the religion. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, definitely. You know, I was going to first point out that Muslims love to talk about their actions, but then character really means being a Muslim. That's all it means. And we got some nice circular logic here as well. So the Quran says that Muhammad has a good character. And then Aisha's asked, well, what does that mean? And he's like, and she says, well, his character is that of the Quran. So the Quran says Muhammad has a good character. Aisha says Muhammad is the Quran. Quran points to Muhammad. Muhammad points to Quran. Just a big circle. It doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, and also we need to clarify one thing. I'm going to go back to the reliance of the traveler. I'll go back to section A 1.4. Skip forward. Unfortunately, this version of I don't have the ability to bookmark things, so it becomes a bit annoying. There's a chapter, and perhaps we should think of slowly winding down at this point, that is. They speak of the knowledge of good and bad, or the knowledge of good and evil, right? And there is no disagreement among the scholars of the Muslims that the source of legal rulings for all the acts of those who are morally responsible is Allah. That's fine. And where's that found? It's in the Sharia. And where's that detail? In the fiqh, right? The sacred law. And we are looking at the sacred law right now. This again is the most famous sacred law manual in the world, right? It is a summary manual. It is not the most detailed, although certain things are very well explained here. If you want more detail, you then go to the references that are provided within this book. You go to the scholars or the books they refer to. In fact, the most detailed one is quite probably the Hidayah, which is 4 volumes, 2,652 pages of information. Like if you want to know about jihad, there's about 65 or 85 pages of detailed explanation there. You want to know about the law of chopping off hands, there's 17 pages of description. So yeah, this one has paragraphs, that one has whole chapters. Let's have a look. The lawgiver, okay, the one who gives the law, because Allah and Muhammad are synonymous. They may as well be the same person, right? Because the one who gives the law, who sets the law in Islam, who creates the Sharia, the Islamic, the perfect law, are synonymous. It says here, Allah or his messenger. In multiple locations, you'll find the lawgiver is Allah or his messenger. They are regarded as synonymous, just under the term lawgiver. It doesn't matter who it is. The lawgiver means either one, and either one is valid. So they have indicated good, okay? They've indicated what is good by either permitting it in the Quran or asking that it be done. And bad is what the lawgiver has indicated is bad by asking it not to be done. The good is not what reason considers good, nor is the bad what reason considers bad. The measure of good and bad, according to Islam, is the sacred law, not reason.
Yep. So whatever Muhammad says goes. And that, I think there's a good video in there how Sharia law declares Muhammad and Allah are the same thing. Because it said that lawgiver can refer to either Muhammad or Allah, and they're the one and the same.
Let me actually find those references. The lawgiver, let's see. Lawgiver, I'll try and find, if I can find it quickly. The lawgiver, synonymous, again, Allah and his messenger. So yeah, they're synonymous. So yeah, we'll just leave that at that. But the two are synonymous. They may as well, they're one and the same.
So we'll just run through the rest of this section on the characteristics of the collar quickly. As we've seen that already, that moral character depends on following the example of Muhammad, and what an example he was. We already covered many of the ways he is definitely not a good example. And then he says, any Muslim who displays bad manners, such as swearing or lying, is either a hypocrite or a very weak Muslim. So again, seems there's a lot of hypocrites and very weak Muslims on YouTube, as I am constantly swear to. And
But then there's a distinction between those who are Muslims and non-Muslims. How they treat Muslims is one thing, how they treat the kafir is another. So if they lie to each other, yes, he's a hypocrite. If he lies to us, he's being a good Muslim. They don't make that distinction.
Definitely. Down below, we highlighted good. We already went over that note, how Islam redefines good. So basically, it all comes down to worshiping any other than Allah makes you a bad person, and worshiping Allah makes you a good person, and that's all it is about. So that concludes the section on the characteristics of the caller. I think we'll probably call it there for today. Did you have any last thoughts you wanted to?
Yeah, well, this also tells us that what is good and bad is not found in reason, in, shall we say, natural law. It is not found even in the Quran, because the Sharia is the ultimate interpretation of the Quran. So good and bad is found within the sacred law. It says the sacred law. Therefore, everything we need can be found here within the sacred law. This is the ultimate definition of right and wrong. And in fact, Islam does not have right and wrong. It does not have moral and immoral. It has legal and illegal. Those are the only categories it has, what is lawful and what is unlawful. And all of that is defined here. So we can find out everything we need to know from within the Sharia, not the Quran.
Yeah. Definitely. So far we just looked at the definition of dawah and the characteristics of the person who should be giving the dawah. Next time we'll pick this up in 2 weeks. We'll look at the characteristics of the person being called, some advice on how to talk to people basically. And then we'll go through, start going through some preliminary arguments he gives in that section. And then we'll look at a long list of terms that he redefines in order to justify Islamic beliefs. That'll probably cover next week. And then in future weeks, we'll go through specific arguments and how to respond to those.
Yeah, as Piggy just said, there's no objective morality in Islam. That is true. You're allowed to do anything. In fact, the scholar called Sharani that they mentioned earlier, the guy that basically, when they said but Quran should not be sold to non-Muslims, he writes, he's the most famous Sharia scholar in that he harmonized the differences within the 4 schools. And what he says is that there are 6 major criteria that come out, or 6 major things that can be learned from the Sharia. 2 of those are that everything is permissible. Everything in Islam is permissible as long as it benefits Islam, and that the ends justify the means. So of the 6 findings that he comes out with, there's the 6 major criteria that he comes up with from the Sharia. Those are 2 that stand out radically. The ends justify the means. Everything is permissible. Everything can be done. There is no law that prevents anything.
Yeah, it's been said often, but it bears repeating that Islam is primarily a system of political power, but not just political power, controlling every aspect of your life. And it's primarily not what we think of as a religion, as how you relate to God and so forth, but rather it's about every aspect of your life. It's about controlling, and it's all about how we can bring more people into this so-called religion and very little about truth.
Yeah. Yes, I hope that was helpful to all of you. I hope that was useful to understand what they're taught, how they're taught, and we will dive in deeper. We're setting a foundation here, and yeah, if there's any more questions, please drop them in the comments. But I hope you are able to read the references and use this to go online.
Absolutely. So Lloyd and I's plan for the next several weeks is we will give the presentation on my channel 1 week. Then we'll take the feedback, revise the presentation, and give it for this channel the following week. So every other week you can count on a continuation of this teaching. We may also throw in from time to time other teachings like on the Crusades or on attempts to find Muhammad in the Bible. Those are things that we're working on.
Well, Islamic slavery.
Slavery, yes, slavery is a good topic. So just stay tuned for announcements. It'll be approximately every other week on this channel, but maybe every week from time to time. And so just keep an eye for the exact times.
Okay, no, thank you. Thank you very much for your time, everyone. That's it from us for this week. We'll see you in 2 weeks on this channel and on Thaddeus' channel every alternate week.
All right. Thank you very much for joining us, everyone. Have a good rest of your day, whether that is just a few hours or your day is just beginning, depending on what part of the world you are. Thank you for joining us, and God bless.